and I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Directors UK. And for those who don't know, that is the national organization that represents all screen directors in the UK, and we handle payments on your copyright. So if you have a film broadcast in the UK, or not anywhere in the world, but in most territories that pay for royalties, we collect those royalties and give it to you as directors. So it's a good organization to be a member of. We've handed out a survey, and I really would appreciate if you would fill it out by the end of the session and give it to Abby here in the front. Just give us some insight into the kind of issues that we'll be discussing today. This session is about how you maintain control in the cutting room as a director. And it's really a vexed question. Interesting enough, I saw quite a few friends here in the last day. I came up yesterday, and they asked what I'm doing, and when I mentioned the title, there's always this slight smirk on their face, a slightly embarrassed look, like, oh gosh, painful subject, maybe they don't want to go there. It is a tricky issue. Now, my position is a rather complex position, I think. All TV shows, all documentaries are a collaboration. At the very least, you're working with a DOP and an editor, but you're almost certainly working with a producer and an AP and other people. You may have collaborators as journalists and so forth who are assisting you with your story, or other kinds of collaborators who may not be working in your team but are assisting you in one form or another. And any effective program, film of this kind will be based upon the success of that collaboration. So from the very beginning, the idea of having absolute control is, in one sense, a contradiction, because you need to work with other people and you need to build the compromises, hopefully for the benefit of the program. But nevertheless, the director is the central creative force when a production is run correctly. Now, in many cases, that's not the reality today, particularly in British television, but our view is that all films need a central creative force, and that should be the director. There is a natural struggle between producer and director, and it's part of the territory, and it's not to be decried. It's something that you actually can use as a positive force. Recent trends, of course, we know attack this idea of the central director. We know that reality TV is about a manufacturing untruths, in my view, not about telling the truth, but taking real people and real situations and manipulating them so that you create a dramatic effect, but that isn't real. There is the splitting up of the role of the director. If you look at what directors do, there's a whole range of things, but the essential thing is they look after the story and the casting as the pre-production stage. They oversee the shooting, and they control the edit. And now you have a lot of productions which hide those three jobs off to different people. So you have a casting director or someone in charge of the narrative at the beginning. Then someone's brought in to shoot it. Sometimes they're shooting directors so that there is no DOP or crew. And then they use the term edit producer to bring in someone in the cutting room. Now, the edit producer, for example, the title is an anomaly because, in fact, what they are edit directors. They're doing the director's job in the cutting room. So they've split that up, and that has caused a great deal of difficulty in the cutting room about how you focus a program and who owns it and who controls it. Then you have the increasing power of commission editors, which we've seen grow year after year after year till they are a very dominant force in the process. Alongside that, you have the increasing centralization of commissioning, where more and more power resides in fewer and fewer commission editors, which means it's a whole train and pyramid of people who are servicing that commission editor, and again, there's a loss of contact with the production team. You have rig shows, which, in a sense, almost push the shooting director out of the field, and all of this adds to a general loss of comprehension of what directors really are doing, or what they should be doing, or what their main role is amongst commission editors, producers, execs, production managers, and so forth. So there's now a growing ignorance about the role of the director in the industry. Now, here to discuss this, we've got a fantastic panel. Down on the end, we have Mike Todd. He's an independent filmmaker with the emphasis very much on independent. He owns his own company. It's called River Horse. He's had a film here in the festival called Hustlers Convention, and we're going to see a clip of it. This is Kirby Dick, a U.S. filmmaker, winner of many awards, and his film is The Hunting Ground, and it's here in the festival. Mike will come to you in a moment.
All right. The film is The Hunting Ground. It's about sexual assault on college campuses. It was very much an investigative piece, as well as a number of other things. What I'm showing here is kind of very, in many ways, very basic filmmaking, but I'm showing it because this is one of the things that I was most concerned about, how, how the film was funded by Radius and by CNN. Radius is a large independent distribution company in the U.S. And I was concerned because these, the claims that are being made in this little section here are very strong. I mean, names of presidents are called out for, their sort of complicity in allowing these crimes to not be investigated properly. So it was one of the sections in the film that, even like I said, even though the filmmaking is simple, it's actually very bold in terms of the sort of the history of the coverage of this in the U.S. And likewise, you'll see this woman here was a professor at Harvard who was let go, and so you're obviously dealing with Harvard University in the United States is sort of a major undertaking. So these were, I mean, everything worked out with this, but it was one of my concerns. I thought I'd be getting pressure on this, so.
I hadn't seen that clip before, but I think some of the themes that appear in it actually about the intimidation of whistleblowers may well come back into our discussions later today. Is Mike, which trailer do we have available next, do you know? Okay, well, having started Mike and then interrupted, trailer interrupt us. Mike Todd, on the end, an independent documentary filmmaker who's very determinedly independent, has his own company, raises his own money, and makes his own films. And his film is the Hustlers Convention, and we'll see a clip of it now.
Yeah, so that was a trailer for our film that's just been on yesterday. I had nothing to do with that, actually. It was cut by the distributors, so I had no control. Yeah, we basically, with this film, it was a case of, and I think we're going to talk about this more later, but from its inception, we put so much time in the way it was kind of put together, so much time and effort in ourselves to get it off the ground. I mean, really, it already had its own momentum. We never really did face a great deal of interference as partners came on one by one, and it was quite a complex structure of the people we brought on board. But I think for us, really, Chuck D, who's in the trailer there, who was Public Enemy's frontman, he came on as executive producer, and in a way, I think that protected us from anyone interfering as well, because he had such credibility in this area. It meant people didn't really want to override him, and he never interfered at all.
And that's a very useful tip, to get someone who has enormous credibility in their own area to be either an advisor or part of your production, or a journalist in the case of Kirby's film. We have also here with us Jill Nicholls. Jill, long distinguished career as a UK documentary filmmaker. Very much an emphasis in her career on remaining freelance, not taking the staff job. And she's currently working on the Imagine series. And she has a film clip here from an Imagine, was it, if I've got it right, Diana Athill, Growing Old Disgracefully.
And it's the very end of a one-hour film, so I just wanted to show you the end and say something about it afterwards. I chose that clip because we were asked to think of something where we'd had a problem with editing and in the cutting room, and the exec on that one wanted to cut it at the point where she's signing the books and leave it there. And I felt strongly that it was a film about her life and her death and her memory, and that the film emotionally needed to finish where it does, which is to take her back to her childhood, to a house where she spent a lot of her time, and to reprise the beginning of the film and look back over her life gently like that. I felt if we left it on the book signing, it would be like a kind of puff for her books, really, and more like a news film or something. It would take the heart out of it. And luckily, well, I tried to explain why I thought that was the case and had some success. And that was one thing to perhaps say is necessary, that you need to be able to verbalise why you think something works, not just have the feeling for it, but to say why it has that feeling. And the other thing that happened was that the series editor saw my point of view and preferred my ending, so I won because of that. And so I guess the message from that is to try to choose your executive producer as much as you're able to, and to work in situations where there aren't too many people trying to tell you what to do, and that the person that you are working to, you have some respect for, has made some films that you like yourself, and perhaps for series or strands which reflect the kind of work that you want to do, so that you stand a chance of making the kind of film that you want to make.
Okay, I'm also a filmmaker. I've got a clip to show you. It's from a film I've just finished, which goes on a general release in the States. Actually went on general release last week, but runs out to a number of US cities this week and next. I too had my issues in the cutting room with this film. It wasn't with the exec, it was quite brilliant. It was funded through Abu Dhabi. But there were people at one of the funders who had personal reasons to be critical of film. They didn't like one of the characters on a personal level, and made life rather difficult. But in the end, I managed to batten down the cutting room door and refused to come out. And I wasn't going to compromise in this particular case, and there wasn't a real basis for it. But it wasn't easy at the latter stages of this. So let's dive into the subject now, and I'd like to spend about 10 minutes on each of these main topics. The first, of course, is the beginning of a production, and the advice I give to, I do a lot of executing myself, and both the producers and directors, is that you have to get it right at the beginning. You have to get the relationships right, and you get the structure right, and so forth. Because of the intense pressures of production, if it isn't right at the beginning, it will never get better. So you have to work it out at the beginning. And I think that's the key to establishing your position on the production. Starting out, getting it right from the very beginning. Let me just go to Jill first, who has some things she would like to say on this subject.
I was thinking, when I started, the first film I did for Channel 4's short stories series, which was a great series for people starting out in observational documentary. And I had an executive producer who I think I was allocated, I don't think I chose her, called Melissa Llewellyn-Davis. And she gave me what I thought was a great piece of advice, which was to make a documentary, particularly observational documentary, obviously, you need 3 things, she said. Well, it was really 4. She said, you need a good character with a good story, doing something interesting, a good camera person, and a good editor. And once you've got those, your job's almost done, and what you need to do is oversee the process, keep a handle on the emotion, the mood, obviously the accuracy, and the story. You are the storyteller. And I thought that was great advice, and it fits in with what Directors UK is saying at the moment about the sort of 3-stage thing of, as Tom explained earlier, of being a director, you know, that you ought to be in charge of each of the 3 stages, and often you're not. And the other great thing about Melissa was that she was a good exec, because having given that advice, she didn't really interfere anymore at all. And she obviously thought being a good exec was choosing a director who had a film they wanted to make and let them get on with it, really. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Kirby, when you get a job, I mean, maybe you develop your own, but if you're hired, what are the kind of things that you want to say to the producers about your relationship to the film and the degree of control or that you might have at the opening stage and the first bit of dialogue with them?
Yeah, I do usually develop my own projects, I guess the relationship is established because they like the material. So it's not so much me. I mean, it may be me coming in and pitching it, but usually the commissioning editors know me. I know them already. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be in there pitching the project. But one thing I wanted to say, which is I think very important for this issue, is looking at the legal contracts in advance, because obviously when you're dealing with networks, in nearly all cases they'll probably want final cut. I mean, there may be some cases where you can fight for that. I don't. Let me think about that. I don't know if with a television network if I've ever. I may have had that actually once, but what you can do, I find what you can do is you can limit the review process. Now, you probably can't limit it all that much, but even some sort of limitation is helpful. For example, if you present a cut, you can put a limitation on the amount of time they have to respond, and if they don't respond, it's considered approved. Or you can try to put a limitation on what exactly they can cut out, or the reason they can approach, they cut something out. Now, most likely the networks are going to push back a fair amount, but you're sort of in the honeymoon phase at the beginning, and if especially if you're bringing the project to them, you're sort of known as an auteur filmmaker. They want to keep you happy, so they might go back to their legal affairs department and say, yeah, we're okay with a little more restriction than we would normally have. And just having that, if it comes down to a disagreement between the network and yourself, just the fact that there's a limitation there gives you a little bit more ammunition. It doesn't give you a lot, but it might give you 25%, and that might save a few shots, a scene, something like that. So, this is all in the boilerplate, but I would suggest reading it very closely. If you think there's any chance that the network might want to pull something out, and as a filmmaker, and knowing the subject matter, you have a much clearer idea of what the risks are, even I think at the beginning, than the network does. So you might be able to just shade that contract in a way that might help you later on.
I would. I mean, Kirby comes from a tradition where the legal contracts, I think, carry a much bigger impact, a bigger sway in American culture than they do in the UK culture. Although contracts are important, and you can actually begin to have some impact on how you go down, how things develop. Although in the UK, there's a terrible tradition. I mean, I've had contracts given to me, finally to sign, after the transmission of the film that I made for the company. So that's the value of contracts in the UK culture. But there are places that you can have an input. We'll come to Mike in just a minute, but very briefly, I'm thinking in terms of early expectations is also your relationship with the producers or the exec and so forth, and how you begin to develop that. We'll go on to that in a minute. But in direct relevance to what Kirby said, you have a production schedule, and you have a series of reviews of the film. And we all know that if it's going well, the reviews, they're looking at this at your film. It isn't just, they don't just check a list, but it doesn't become onerous. But they can extend your editing period and have more and more reviews. And to really attack that, make sure that you don't show the film until you're ready to show the film, and make it clear that there's a good reason why. And one of the reasons why is that I always say to my producers or execs, there's no sense me showing you the film and being told what I already know. The opening doesn't work yet, and the end isn't finished, and there's some trouble with the middle. So I'm going to show it to you, and you're going to tell me the same thing. That's a waste of my time. That's a waste of your time. Let me show it to you when I need some input. And you have this rational discussion. So you start talking about it right away. Let's not waste time on viewings that are not going to be helpful to either of us. Let's focus on viewings that can be constructive. So you begin to have a dialogue, and you're already facing and grabbing a hold of the issues about how you're going to manage the end of the film. And that's something you can do at a very, very early stage. Mike?
Yeah, no, I think when we putting projects together, it's from that basis we're also developing our own ideas and pitching them. And because we're a small independent, we're often reliant on other partners to kind of get them off the ground. So these sort of co-productions in a way, even though we remain clearly the lead partner. But I think it's who you bring in on. In effect, talking about the contract matters, you can sort of, by having multiple contracts, protect yourself because you have numerous partners to satisfy. So I'm not saying it's so duplicitous as you play them off against each other, but it sort of can work that way because everyone has got to have a say. So if someone get,
You wouldn't play someone off against someone
no,
else.
not at all. Would I? I mean,
That's shocking. Production managers. I probably shouldn't tell this story. There's no journalists in here, are there? Are there journalists? There are various ways in which you can remunerate yourself for expenses. And I remember my team had this very interesting sort of quasi-official operation on an LA film. And the production manager was sent out because it was such an intense, to oversee things. And the field producer realized immediately that the scam he was operating could be discovered, which had to do with petrol, basically. You go into a petrol station, and in America, they don't trust you. They can drive off. So you have to either give a credit card or cash up front, and they give you a receipt for that amount. So you go in and you give them $80. And then you put $10 in the tank, and you go back and you give them the $80 receipt, and they give you $70 back. And they give you a new receipt, right? Well, you can choose to put the $80 receipt in or the $10 receipt in. And American production companies are very alive to this scam, so you can't get away there. But the UK guys aren't. So the producer very much took the production manager out and had her do the scam and immediately compromised her, and she couldn't report it because she was now part of it. I mentioned that.
Set her up so she couldn't critique what you were
doing. Yeah, exactly. The idea was to set her up so she came in on the sharing of this little scam, and consequently, how could she raise the issue because she was now part of it? But I tell that story because actually there's another way. I think that's an important process, and of getting the production manager over on your side. And they're often the employee, or they're almost always the employee, unless you have an independent production like like Mike. Excuse me. They're the employee of the organization, and they're loyal to the execs and so forth. And you have to find a way of winning them over to your side, and treat them excessively kindly, share as many things with them. But what you need to do is suss out very quickly as to whether they're ever going to be able to see the need to protect the film as opposed to simply protect the exec. So production managers that are in-house can be dangerous, but they can also be turned. And you can turn them to your, and that's what you need to do. You need to think very carefully about how you can win this person over. Because at very critical moments, you might need some more shooting days or might need some more resources. And if you have a production manager who's just looking at the bottom line all the time and said, my job is to keep the cost down, I'm sorry, we don't have the money. It's very different from a production manager whose attitude is, God, I know Tom really needs this extra shooting. Where am I going to find the money? Where am I going to find the money, right? And we'll work with you. So it's, in a sense, it's not about compromising. It's about getting people throughout the team to join you in your enterprise and to bring them in, as opposed to alienate them. And production managers in an early stage, because of the shooting requirements, that's where you're going to need the most, where the cash flow is the highest and where you're all over the place traveling and so forth. You really need that central person. You want to get them on side. But that's also important with the exec and with the producer. So does anybody here have some strategies we can talk about of how to win over your exec or to at least neutralize them in some respect?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the, first of all, I think it's important to, well, one of the things, my first advice is if an exec comes to you and tells you something that you don't agree with, do not disagree with it when they tell you. Just listen, say it's a very good, it's an interesting idea, you'll think about it and come back, 2 days, 3 days later, because it might just be something that he or she thought of in the last half hour before she's talking to you, or
the last 2 minutes.
Or the last 2 minutes. So I've made that mistake a couple of times. I had a situation where somebody came to me and pitched me a film that I absolutely didn't want, it was somebody I worked with a fair amount that I absolutely did not want to do, and I just said, no, I don't want to do that film. I mean, I was polite, but I just said, no, that's not the kind of film I make. And it was, you know, actually it was the exec under the sort of person who ran the network and, or ran the, you know, the documentary portion of the network. And I think that when that went back, you know, the person who ran the doc portion of the network was kind of insulted. And I realized if I left some sort of lag time, I think it would have been fine. And just to extend that to kind of the review of cuts, when you get notes from an executive, I sort of have a kind of a policy. Well, let me say this. Let me back up a little bit. The other policy I have in dealing with execs is that if I'm writing a letter to an exec and it's anything more than just perfunctory, I always have somebody else review it. I mean, even if it's an assistant, if there's not a producer in the room or available, just does the tone sound right? Does it make sense? Is it going to cause any problem? It's just a policy that I have, and it's because, I mean, I think one of the things to realize about execs is that in many cases, they're in a very not really a tenuous position, but it's a very stressful position. So the last thing you want to do is do something that adds stress. So you may be trying to get an important point across, but you don't want to get it across in a way that causes them to be upset. So and then just to getting to this idea of you know, executives reviewing a cut, you know, I think it's really important, obviously, to listen to all the notes, listen very carefully, and you know, have them elaborate if you don't understand to make sure you understand everything. But again, don't respond. And then when you go back and you execute the notes, I mean, what I find is that, I mean, you may execute some, you may not execute the others, but what happens is, to begin with, you know, these execs probably, I mean, I've worked with really wonderful executives, and they oftentimes have really great notes. So I find a third, when you come back and screen it again, I find that, you know, a third of the notes I actually executed, a third of the notes they actually completely forgot about. And that happens a lot. Just because they tell you you absolutely must do something, they may completely forget about it. And the other third of the notes that I didn't execute, they'll think that was really great, even though the first time they saw it, it was, you know, they had a huge problem with it. So, you know, it's just, I think it's really important to not only give that space, but just assume that the second time they see it, they may not see it, you know, they may not understand it the same way they did the first time.
I would say, like Tom, to try and explain as much as you can at the beginning and then keep them out of the cutting room for as long as you possibly can, because people always think that they can watch a rough cut and understand it, and in my experience not very many people really can, and so they always think there are more problems than there will be once you've had time to work on it. So find an exec who you trust and stick with them as much as you can is what I've done, and rather than moving around too much. Because when you're new to somebody, obviously they're nervous. They don't know what you can do, and they don't know that you're going to be able, you know, that you how you approach things and what it's going to be like in the end. And yeah, keep them away for as long as you possibly can with as many excuses as possible. I don't know about other people, but I find in Britain people don't tend to do notes so much. I don't get notes really. It's more people come in and talk. And obviously you try and, like, as you say, keep it as friendly as possible, and, you know, always say that you'll think about things rather than say no. And then maybe later you might have to say no, but try and get through by pleasantness rather than confrontation. Seems to work.
To underline a couple, I mean, one of the things that Kirby said, which I thought was interesting, but kind of went slightly under the radar in his comment, was that he went to his own team and asked them to review his emails to an exec, right? And that's all about team building. So that's the same as what I'm saying about production manager. You build a team that are loyal to the film and hopefully loyal to you, and depend upon them, use them, ask them, work with them, and so forth. If you can build that team so it includes with the exec, you know, then you're really on a winning. You know, you don't have to have a war with the exec necessarily, right? And also this point about appearing cooperative. I mean, I look at it two things. I look at about laying down markers. So whenever I'm asked to do things, I always say, "Oh yes, I'm very, like Kirby says, very willing, really open to the idea. which you're then going to evaluate. You're not going to give an instant reply. And I always add, yes, of course, I'll look at it. If that makes the film better, of course I'm interested. So right away, I'm beginning to give this message, if it makes the film better. And that's the phrase I use all the time. That won't make the film. It's not about me, it's about the film, and will it make it better? Will that make the film better? Oh, really? Any ideas make the film better, right? I don't think that would make the film better. That's my problem with it. I mean, tell me. You know, let's talk about the film, right? And so that's a different and less emotional landscape, right? And it's also the value that you want to instill. That's what you're about. So you're trying to tell the exec, I'm very open, I'm always cooperative, but I'm also tough. And I'm tough because I'm fighting for the film. If you want to join me in fighting for the film, wow, great. And if you want to screw my film, we got a problem. Right? So that's the message. And of course, there's also never, never lying. You never lie because if you get caught on that, you're dead. You're dead in the water, and that's over. But you don't ignore...
But you can avoid telling things. You can
yeah,
avoid
exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. But never, ever, I mean,
it's
because...
not a confession.
Right, no, you want to be very careful what you say, but you never lie because then you're in dangerous... It'll undermine your position even psychologically, that you'll be worried that you... So you don't ignore challenges, you build confidence, you appear cooperative, and you actually sincerely are cooperative in the benefit of the film, for the benefit of the film. And the final thing I try to do is I try to assign responsibility for decisions. So if an exec comes to me and says, I really do think we ought to go to San Diego and shoot this, and you go, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. And then the production manager says, you know, we got the money. I mean, we got money to go. And you say, okay, John, we'll go to San Diego. I'll do my best to make it work. It's not really where I think we should be spending the money right now, but I'm really willing to help and really willing to, you know, because maybe San Diego will work out. And then it's all very clear that it wasn't Tom's decision to go to San Diego. It was John's decision to go to San Diego, and Tom went along with it. If San Diego didn't work out, well then, John, hey, wait a second. The last time we followed your advice, you know, if it did work out, you say, John, you were fucking brilliant. I'm really glad you made me go. And then you get a big pat on the back, and then you build a relationship further. We haven't spoken to Mike here, so you have a different relationship, but it's mainly with your funders. So how do you manage these relationships?
Yeah, it's slightly different, I suppose, in terms of we're not normally, if we have any broadcaster involvement, it comes much at a later stage. So we are really crafting an independent film. So in a way, when you're dealing with the funders or the people like, let's say, for example, Creative England were one of the main funders of this film, they do expect still to have final cut and approval because they're investing in it on a semi-commercial basis. But they, I think, are much less bullish than broadcasters in terms of interfering because they're more passive, really. So I think in terms of retaining creative control, it is very difficult to put together projects the way we do, I think, from experience. But the reality is we have always been able to say, when the film's finished, that that's the film that we've made, and no one's ever really, even though we've had to deal with comments along the way, but I think it's more light touch. So I think we're probably slightly different than the other people speaking today in that we are kind of creating these things from inception and putting a lot of our own time and effort and legwork in before anyone gives us permission to create them. I'm not saying that.
But you do have to build confidence.
Yeah, you have to build confidence, and this is, again, it's about getting the right partners and executive producers or co-producers who come on board, and you have to have that kind of belief in the project. Similar to you, you kind of believe that they're part of something, they're part of this film, and it's the film that matters, and then they've obviously got to back you as well and believe in you to make it, but if you can get their buy into the project and that they know no one cares about it more than you do, you know, so.
We've mentioned, Final Cut's been mentioned a couple of times. We need to come back to that. It's really very important, but let's take off the back of what Mike has just said and talk about the creative vision, communicating your creative vision. And that's what, in a sense, you're referring to, that you're the one who is driving it as a director. You're the one who believes in it more than anyone else. I mean, you can be sometimes at fault for being too caught up in the world of the film and not seeing other things. That's a criticism that you're often likely to encounter. And it's not necessarily an invalid criticism. Sometimes I mean, I was an exec. I've done a lot of executing work, and there have been some really great teams I've worked with, and you know, you see them going slightly wrong, and all I've done is gone over and tap them on the shoulder, and they're looking this way, and I go, hey, just a minute, look over there. And they look over there and they go, oh, wow, yeah, well, and they go over there because they're a good team and they're responsive, but they can get caught up going down particular routes in that sense. How do you communicate your creative vision? How do you get that across? And of course, if you have a vision and they buy into it, which is the whole idea of getting people to buy into what you're doing, then you're actually on much stronger ground. Jill?
I guess you just have to be able to really explain what you've got in your mind, which isn't always that easy, I find, because they're images, and editing especially is a very intuitive process, isn't it? It's not just a logical thing. So you can spare, and nowadays a lot of executive producers and companies expect you to have sort of made the film before you've made it as well, before you've even shot it, let alone before you've edited it. So it's quite hard to say for sure what it's going to be until you've been there. But you have to be able to do that as much as you can. And something that Tom said just then made me think it's important that you're kind of a team. You've got to be sort of pretend to be a team player, but you are also like the team leader. And on the whole, the execs, they haven't got the time that you've got to spend on the film. It's not just that it's not their creative vision, but you are doing it full time while you're doing it. And they're actually grateful for that in some way, that, you know, you are doing it, because they can't, you know, they could probably, you know, make their own film, but that's not what they're doing. You're doing it, and they're trying to see it through. So somehow you've got to persuade them that you know what you're doing and that it's going to happen. And the more you can do that, and the more they can see that you've done that before, then the more they'll leave you to it.
Kirby, how much does the vision play into your winning the commissions that you do? How much is it like, we got Kirby and he's got this idea?
Well, I think it's extremely important. You know, I develop my own projects. Oftentimes I've done kind of a development reel, sometimes, you know, funded by me, sometimes funded by a network. I would say, I mean, I think people know me as someone who, you know, who makes the films that I want to make, and so yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they know what they're getting in terms of someone who has experience and who's, you know, makes quality films. So it's really up to me to sort of convince them that this film will really knock it out of the park. I mean, you have to get it to that level. In my mind, you have to, because obviously they're asking to put a lot of money, and they don't have that many, you know, films that they can commission. So you know, I think it's really important. And then you know, I have this real sense of obligation too to these executives. I mean, that's actually something that I feel very strongly, is that there's this relationship of me to deliver what I promised on, and it's actually a motivating thing. I mean, rather than to see them as I actually want them to walk away very happy. I mean, I really, really do. I mean, so that's actually part of the motivation to, you know, to make the best film possible.
I mean, it's an important idea. I mean, when I look back over my career, the films I feel proudest of invariably had an excellent producer, an excellent exec, and a very first-rate commission editor. And the films that I feel a lot less proud of, maybe don't love any less, but don't feel very proud of, there was a pain in the ass as an exec who was incompetent or insecure or distracted, and a commission editor who had other weaknesses. These people do have an impact, and they can't be avoided. I mean, if you're working with really, really good people, they make it easy, they clear the road for you, they support, sustain, encourage, push you, and the not-so-good people block you and frustrate you and consume your energies and so forth. You know? Right,
and I wanted to add about those weaknesses. I mean, first of all, everybody has weaknesses, right? And secondly, it's important that you identify those as early as possible. And then that's again where, I mean, I have my own team. I have a producer, an associate producer, an assistant, and it's important to have the conversation. If you can start to see problems forming, it's important to understand, you know, what kind of person this person you're dealing with is, and what kind of pressures they're under. Look to past films and see how they've dealt with them. Even talk to past directors or producers who have interacted with them, and do that, because it's kind of important to get a sense of what kind of person they are, because I mean, perhaps this developing problem might go away, or it suddenly might become a crisis. You're going to have to make a decision very, very quickly, and you want to make a decision based on you've taken time to think this through. I mean, is this a person, you know, has the person been there for a long time? If they've been there for a long time, and that means they're probably stronger, they're not getting pressure from somebody else. Or is a person a strong person, somebody who's willing to fight? Some executives aren't willing to fight. They're much more corporate. And then you just have to kind of deal with that, but you have to know that going in.
Researching your producer, it's called research, I mean, really, and if you're going to get the best character in a film, you spend a lot of time trying to find who those characters are and how they behave and what they might be up to. Well, you do it with your execs and your producers, particularly if it's a new team. It's really very important. And the other thing we mentioned at the beginning, but Kirby comes back to it, it's getting it right at the beginning, right? Now, on the idea of a creative vision, and Jill's right, that when you get, your creative vision is not complete until you've finished your fine cut, right? Interesting enough, feature films have a script, and you shoot the script. In a documentary, you've written the script, and the script is then completed on the last cut. In other words, the script is the last thing you do. You go into a cutting room and you write the script, effectively, and the script's not completely written until the film's finished. So it's the opposite way of working. But what you can do, and this is part about bringing your execs in and so forth, but working out how you're going to work, is you're constantly asking them, what is this film for? You are commissioning me, or you've commissioned it, or you're paying for it, or I've sold you, and remember what the film is going to do. It's going to do this, it's going to do this, it's going to do this. It's not going to do this, this, and this. Right? And you say that loudly and clearly all the time, that what we're trying to do is we're trying not to get a huge audience. It's not a popular film. This is a hardcore investigative film that's going to be a flagship program for your outfit. Or it's designed to have a very, very wide reach, right? Or it's designed to do this, or designed to do that, or open up a new, whatever it's going to do. And you identify that at the beginning, and you keep repeating that as a mantra throughout, so that you're able to use that, again, as a bulwark against interference. At some point, you can say, wait a second, you said that this is not a popular film, right? That this is about an investigation. Well, if we're going to stay true to this investigation, we have to do this, not what you're suggesting, or the other way around. Do you find, Mike, that you have to spend time with your funders and, in a sense, teach them about what you're doing?
Yeah, I think with the type of films we do, they're perhaps slightly nuanced, different takes on subjects that are quite popular. Quinnell, who's in the audience there, is a producer and also for film, and we work closely on a lot of our projects together. But we did a film, which I think you know about, Tom, on Joe Fraser a few years ago, and it wasn't really a traditional boxing film. I mean, it was about kind of his gym and how his legacy was perceived and all the rest of it, but people reacted to it in different ways. But we had a challenge with that. I think it took a long time in development because it was not the expected handling of the material. So yeah, I think we have that issue with the creating, similar with this film, with the title of it, Hustlers Convention, and what it's, you know, it's like we were talking about yesterday. I think there's a certain expectation of what people will see with this film, but it's really about something that at first glance it may not appear to be. So it is a bit of a challenge because oftentimes people may come on board with the idea of a project and see it and perceive it a certain way, and then we're not quite giving them what they expect, but at the same time, hopefully you can take them with them, you know, with you still.
And when you take them with you, I mean, is that something that you do at the beginning, or something that's a long process?
It's difficult, really, because for us, and I think I'm sure it's the same for many people, you are you want people to back you, so you do start out perhaps pitching it in a way to get them on board. If you've not got long established collaborations and each new project might be a struggle, then you still want people to invest or to back you. So you sort of are perhaps telling them what they want to hear as well, and then it evolves over time. But you'd hope bit by bit. I mean, for us, as we've made more films, you can begin to establish a reputation. For example, when you talk about, you know, in high quality investigative films, once you've got that, and hopefully that's in a position where we're moving into, when you've established a reputation for delivering a certain type of film, then it makes those conversations easier. not very easy for us yet still.
I mean, the early pitch is always a problem because, I mean, I see it partly as a seduction process that, you know, you're trying to seduce someone in some form. You're not going to say, by the way, I've got this terrible, you know, bad breath, or I've got this, you know, problem here, or I've got, you know, I'm about to lose my house because I'm going to be arrested or something. You know, you put your best self forward, but at the same time, if you're not true to yourself or who you really are, at some point in this developing relationship, you're going to be discovered. And so you oversell, or you missell or misdirect and so forth. So from the very early stages of how you're talking about a project, you need, in a sense, I think, to get it on the right, it may not be fully formed, it may not be highly sorted out and have all the details worked out, but you need to place it in the space where it is going to stay. You know, this is a journalistic exercise. This is an exercise of bringing to the public's attention something about how the, say, for example, the U.S. University system pays lip service to equality, fairness, and lack of abuse on their campuses, and in fact do exactly the opposite. We're going to break that wide open, right? And you may not quite know how you're going to do that or how it's going to unfold, but at the same time, that's what you're doing, and you're all clear about it. Did you find, I mean, this, I can see highly contentious. I know why you picked that bit, because you're now pointing fingers at some very important senior people who all would have an interest in it not being shown. Did you find that that people wavered at some point, that people began a bit anxious? Oh God, Mike, we know you wanted to investigate this, but haven't you gone a bit too far?
There was some concern about that. I mean, we had to get our facts completely right. It was interesting. That scene was actually very important, especially with the presidents. That simple filmmaking was actually extremely important for the film, because we'd been focusing on college campuses around the country, but we hadn't really. We named specific schools: Notre Dame, Harvard, Berkeley, but we hadn't named, even though we'd continually pointed the finger at presidents, we hadn't named them. And there was something about seeing this collection of presidents and their sort of complicity, which really brought the film together. It was actually right before the final 7-minute sort of section of the film. So it was incredibly important. I mean, that's. But yes, I mean, no one had really done that. I mean,
the lawyers were anxious, were they?
Everybody was actually anxious, because no one had done that. No one, I mean, people had written about it, but no one had sort of put the president on a pedestal and said, this is what happened. And certainly not done it back to back to back to back like that. So, so yeah, there was a great deal of anxiety, I think, all the way around, but, I mean, we just, we had our facts down, and there's not, and so we just stood behind that, which is actually oftentimes very important, to say, look, these are the facts, and we can back them up and give them all the, the documentation they need, because when you're getting into this kind of territory, people are, rightfully concerned about being sued, because obviously, in the U.S. in particular, because obviously, these networks have a lot of money, and that's where the lawsuit is going to go to first.
Okay. What I want to do is I want to talk about 3 elements that can be allies. We have about another 25 minutes, and I want to get to the end about how you win in the end.
Should we also do questions?
What? Yeah, we can take. Do we have? Is there other we can also take questions now. But,
I'd like to know who they are.
we want to. Yeah.
I was chucking a question about.
Sure.
Sorry. Obviously, what we've been talking about here is that ideal scenario of. You've pitched an idea, you've got funding, you've taken it all the way through the production and delivered it. But I just wondered, when we're having the discussion, if there are examples of, for example, often it's the exec who pitches the idea, it's a very vague idea, it's given to a director. Often you can be the edit producer who comes in, or edit director, and comes in at a late stage. So just when having this discussion, if there are examples of how you deal with that situation where you haven't really had ownership from the beginning, and so you're trying to keep control, but also it's kind of ultimately someone else's idea at the beginning you're trying to realize.
I mean, I can respond to that, but Well, I mean, I would say very simply that in a sense, you have to work harder on the same things you already talked about. In other words, you have to take it over, and the process of taking it over can be quite tricky. But it's about sitting down with the exec and saying, what is it you want me to achieve? What are we after? And as they hand it over to you, you check back with them all the time and you share your growing vision with it, but eventually at some point, in a psychological sense, they have handed it over to you, and you have to make them confident that you are going to be fulfilling their aims, but you're going to be doing it through your vision. It's a tricky thing, and you start from a compromised position from the very beginning. So it's not easy. It's not easy, and it can be fraught with difficulties, but that's what I would That's how I would try to approach it. I mean, that's this film here that I showed you was, they called, I got a phone call, and they didn't know what they really wanted. They wanted to film about the campaign, and the political campaign in Pakistan. So I spent a lot of time creating a vision, sold them on the vision, and once we had the vision sold, off we went.
You have to kind of go native with it, don't you? And I think you do. I've often taken on films that somebody else has had the germ of the idea, and I'm given that as a subject, and then you have to make it your own. And unless you can do that, you won't be able to get through to the end, really. The main problem is if people have bigged it up too much to begin with, you know, and pretended it's about all kinds of big, airy-fairy things, that it's hard to make it about. You know, it kind of might be about that as a subtext, but to bring that out is the challenge sometimes. And often when people are pitching an idea, they do oversell it, don't they, and over-egg it and big it up. That's not quite so bad, because that's more on the level of ideas. There's a problem if on the level of what you're going to be able to get, they've bigged it up and pretended that you're going to be able to get content that just isn't available. But yeah, I always find that you do more and more, it becomes yours, and then it's yours and the camera operator while you're working together, and then it's yours and the editors. And the beginning seems a long time ago by the time you get to the end.
One thing I was reminded of when I saw the films was the place of music, which hasn't been discussed here, and that I've found is left pretty open and vague at the beginning of discussions. And then I've dealt with a commissioning editor who just wanted music over everything, and seeing the films reminded me of that. And not being a musician myself, I found it hard to discuss in definite terms what the terms of the agreement would be like and what it should be like. But music's such a powerful thing; it can change the whole feeling of a film in the end. So you must have all come up against that, and how you make decisions as directors in that area. We haven't really discussed that. I hope it's not off topic.
No, I think that's interesting. I've never had any problems with it. I've never had any interference. And I usually know what the kind of mood is, what the feeling I want is in the film. And then I work often with the same editor, and I like his choices of music. He cuts very well with music. And so we collaborate, and I've only ever had good feedback. The only bad time I've had with it is doing something for Channel 4, and we'd put music on which we then couldn't use. You're very protected at the BBC because there's that blanket agreement, and you have access to so much music that you could use. And with Channel 4, we had to change everything quite late on, and that was hard. It was hard to get. Everybody was so bonded with what we'd put on that we couldn't use. That's the only time I've had problems. It worked out okay, I think, but it wasn't as good as the music we had on the rough cut. And the exec noticed that, obviously, because it wasn't, I think we put the Stones on or something, which we couldn't have. It was a film about the German foreign minister's sort of street fighting past. And
I mean, I haven't had it the other way around, but as an exec, my attitude is this, that my interventions in the cutting room have to do with what works for the film. So what I say to a director, I can say, I don't like your choices of music, but it doesn't harm the film. And since I'm not making the creative decisions, it's none of my business, because I don't like the music, right? But it's working in the film. The only time I would say that I think the music should be changed if I feel that it's producing an effect that's contrary to the benefit of the film, and then I would intervene and say that the music's wrong. You got to find a different choice of music and take it in a different direction. Now, commission editors are intervening on an ever-increasing scale, and I think one has to tough it out. One has to say, at the very end of the process, you can say, look, you want to come in this film and you want to cut it, you come in and cut it and you do all the music decisions, right? But I'm the director and I'm going to make the music decisions, and if it's not working, you tell me where it's not working and I'll find the solution. But it's, you know, at the end. But before you get to that point, you need to begin a dialogue and say, what is it you don't like about the music? And it's just a personal choice. And frankly, I've shown it to 30 other people, and they all love the music. So we have, it sounds like it's a personal choice on your part. Now, a lot of people are afraid of confronting commissioning editors, but they're very busy people. They don't like opposition, but often they don't have time to deal with opposition. So if you can find a way of frustrating, you take Kirby's view, don't answer immediately, but kick it into the long grass, that's another solution.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember we had a commission editor come in and it killed the director. She had 130 points. I take notes on, make a note of everything, right? And at the end of the viewing, he was like on the floor. What are we going to do? 130, how are we going to do that? She wants to see it in 5 days' time. I said, we're going to pick the best, most important 30. What about the other 100? I said, she won't even remember. And then what will happen? I said, of the 30, she'll have another 50, and we'll do 10. And then, and not do them the way she wants them, we'll do them the way, we'll find our solution to her issue. And then at the end of the day, she'll have 10 and we'll do 3. And we'll say, we've done what you've asked, come on, back up, you know, and that's what you do, is you find them.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when they see, like, let's see, you know, they see the 30 out of the 130 done, they feel so good, right? It's like, yeah, I see that change, I see that change. They're focusing on the changes they see, not on the changes that they, you know, don't remember. So it's, you know, you just have, I think you just have to have a percentage. I mean, that's actually a calculation you have to make, is that if they're asking for a range, and even if you disagree with all of them, it might be advisable to try to make a few, or even change it, but not necessarily change toward their suggestion, but change what they don't like. So at least it seems like you're part of the process. And the other thing, I mean, I think it's important. I mean, I've dealt with, you know, executives, commissioning editors, I call them executives, but who have been in the business for years and years and years. And, you know, it's really important to listen to them. I mean, some of these people have overseen 500 films. I mean, they've seen, you know, and they can read rough cuts. I mean, they can read, you know, I've dealt with people who can read a rough cut as well as anybody. And they oftentimes have really good suggestions. So just because it's, you know, kind of coming from above and it's, you know, it's a little bit of an imposition, I think it's very important to listen and even check with other people. I mean, go the rest of your staff or anybody else who's kind of close to the project and say, what about this? Because you might find that this, you know, you might find that even though their suggestion of how to solve it isn't right, their identification of the problem has merit.
I would say it always has merit. I mean, if they have a concern, then you haven't, I mean, when an audience watches a film, what you want them to do is be so in the film that they never step outside and think, oh, why is that? What, you know, so you want absolutely smooth running. Well, if someone's come to see a film and they have, oh, I was a bit worried about this here, well, you haven't solved the problem. Maybe the suggestion they're giving you isn't effective, or you don't want to respond to that. But the fact that they have an objection or concern at that point, you have to address. And I often say when I'm in a good relationship with people, I say, look, and I often say this very early on, I say, tell me what your problems are, and I will do everything I can to solve them. I'm not interested in your solutions. I'm the filmmaker, right? So it's not your solutions because I know best, because I know the material, but tell me where we have a problem, and I will bend over backwards to make sure that problem doesn't occur again.
And that's what I meant earlier about trying to find executive producers who you can respect and build up a mutual trust, because a lot of executive producers have made great films themselves in the past or are still making great films, as well as being execs. And so you try and find people like that, whose advice is going to be valuable.
So I was going to ask about, it was really useful advice about sort of listening, taking it in and not responding straight away. I thought it was really useful advice. I think sometimes a lot of the world that we're kind of working in is kind of series and things. There's much less room for sort of one-offs and things. And then suddenly I think the amount of execs, series producers, commissioning editors, but I mean the list is endless. And sometimes you end up in, you know, a viewing with kind of not just one exec's comments, but a commissioning editor's comments. And then somebody else has seen it on a train and sent you some notes. And then a day later somebody else has got, and the noise can just be enormous sometimes with all these different And if you haven't got a series producer who's protecting you from all these kind of things as well, and I've just wondered if you had any advice or experience of kind of dealing with, yeah, I suppose the noise of 1,000,001 different opinions that you're kind of...
Yeah, I know just what you mean. I've been in that situation, and I suppose my experience has been to try and avoid it as much as possible. I know it's hard, but to try and find places where there aren't so many chiefs, not so many layers of management, and find places where there are people, if there are a lot of people, find the one who's sort of got the most say and work mainly to them, because you can't work to everybody, and they're often second-guessing each other and watching their own back, aren't they? Trying to say the right thing, echoing each other.
Yeah, I would take the martial arts view to the problem, right? And I don't do martial arts. I haven't got a clue, but I think I understand that a lot of them are about using your opponent's energy against them. Now, the situation you described, I thought would be actually the more the merrier, because then you say, I'm sorry, I can't do that, because so-and-so said exactly the opposite, right? Right? And you immediately, and of course, they don't know what the other person said, so you can block everybody by saying, but I was told by that person that, and you just throw it all back at them and let them have their cat fight.
But you said, well, you must never lie.
No, I'm not lie fundamentally about your film and the characters and whatever. So I'd play it. But there are three other areas, and I don't think we're going to have much time to go into them, that you can do the same thing. One is the legal team, the other is health and safety, and the third is your contributors. Health and safety is one of the simplest, although in some ways the most difficult because of the confrontational nature of it. But I go to Afghanistan, I have to do 60-page protocol for Channel 4. I get to Afghanistan, nothing in the protocol actually helps me operate safely on the ground. It's all about checking boxes for them. And I know productions that have had to drive through the night. They've finished at 11 o'clock in Manchester and had to be at Tunbridge Wells at 8 in the morning. Now, that's a 4 or 5 hour drive, and that's a direct violation of health and safety. So if you're not happy with what you're being asked to do, you don't make it a personal thing. You just say, I'm sorry, you've given me responsibility to operate this production safely, and I'm now being required to do something which is profoundly unsafe against all kinds of initiative. If it was in the papers, if it was reported in the court, it would be a direct violation of what is safe. Therefore, we can't drive through the night, and therefore we either have to finish early, bring another team on, or not shoot on Sunday. Now, that's quite confrontational, but health and safety, you can use that to your benefit.
I just wanted to, do you mind if I
of
jump
course,
in?
yeah.
I think a way to do that is, if that's a good thing to do in writing, and then it can become much less confrontational, because you can just say, hey, I have a slight concern that this, there could be some legal problems, we could be at legal risk. Now, if you put something like that in writing, and at least in the U.S., that's going over to business affairs, and they, now that you've put them on notice that they could, potentially cause, this decision could potentially hurt somebody, and then it does hurt them, that person has a very, very strong legal case. So putting it in writing, I don't know, at least in the U.S., you could do it in a very soft way and get exactly what you want.
Well, actually, that's the point about the legal side. We're going to come on. Yes, it does work very powerfully here. You have to be careful not to overuse it, but
yes.
Particularly it comes with your contributors, for example. But particularly, and I think this is a Channel 4 thing at the moment. I mean, they're just driving roughshod over their contributors. I mean, I know so many unpleasant stories about how they've insisted in their reality programs back then and so forth, the manipulation of their characters and so forth for their own dramatic ends. And your responsibility as the program maker is to make sure that all the compliance regulations, that the families know about it or the contributors understand it, all these things that you're required by the legal team. But you can turn that around in the cutting room and turn around and say, wait a second, you're asking me to do something which would harm my contributors, or they would be upset with, and that's a violation of my obligation in terms of my contributors. And the minute you put that in writing, even if you put it in a soft way, the lawyers will sit up. Whoa, we have a bit of a problem here. The other advantage of putting it in writing is that you have a record of these conversations. This is something we haven't touched on, but if you do find yourself in an increasing conflictual kind of thing, write down emails and keep emails in which you say, I'm worried about, not don't do this, I'm worried about the health and safety conditions that the team are under now, and I'm just wondering if you can help me solve those problems. There is an email that said you were worried about health and safety before the accident happened, and you brought it to the attention of a senior person, and they didn't act. You've already shared responsibility and in a sense pushed it up. You can do this with lawyers fantastically well, right? You need a good relationship with a lawyer. Often they're working for the other side, but you can turn them, because at the end they have legal responsibility. So you can sometimes, and Kirby's absolutely right, you raise it, you say, it's not me, it's not a creative thing, it's about our moral, ethical, Ofcom regulations or obligations, and I'm disturbed by this. And already it will change the landscape of the discussions. Do we have other questions? I want to turn to one final topic before we only have a few more minutes. Any more questions? We can come at the end. I want to ask the panel, starting down the end with Mike, is what happens when you have got to that position where you're at loggerheads and they want to do something, someone along the line wants to do something which you are very much opposed to. So any thoughts about how you win that final battle?
To be honest, it's not something we've had a fundamental problem with to date. I think really it goes back to, I think, how we've structured projects and how we've started them from the beginning, so as not to be sort of exposed at the end where you may be in that kind of a position where, you know, one side versus the other. It's been fairly, I think as well with what people are describing in terms of the relationships with people, if you've got that dialogue on an ongoing basis and they feel a part of the project and it is collaborative, then hopefully you can kind of avoid that full-on confrontation. But obviously it does happen, so I'm not giving some great advice here for people, because really the advice that from our experience is about how the project's set up in the first place, rather than getting to the point near the end where you've got some sort of final confrontation.
Yeah. Okay, to sum that up is, don't get in that position, sort it out from the beginning. Obviously, Mike's been very successful at that, so that's to your credit, probably. Kirby?
I've actually only had it in one situation. It was more of a minor film, and it was about the length of a film that you know, the executive, the commissioning editor wanted it shorter, and it was a big mistake. At the time, I didn't realize what a big mistake it was, and in retrospect, I really regret doing that. I got reviews which sort of commented on the fact that it was moving too fast, and and once I got that review, I said, oh yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, I don't know. I think it's, if you're in that position, I mean, obviously you're going to try to do everything you can, but I would certainly, kind of step back a little bit and see how important this issue is. Because, first of all, because, I mean, you have to look at the sum total of the whole project and what you have. Because an audience, I mean, it could be, may not, even though it's very major to you, an audience may not really notice the difference. So you have to have a real strong sense of what your film is. And I do screenings of my film to small audiences in very informal ways throughout. So having that knowledge going in will determine, will help me decide whether this is something I really want to fight for. And then, of course, I would just furiously be, in the editing room, be trying alternatives to see if there's a way I can solve that problem. I mean, and even keeping that going on for as long as possible, because you might be able to wear out an exec by just keep continuing to give alternatives to them. And they might finally go, okay, we'll compromise with this one that you think is second best, but it's not what they were insisting on, which you were fighting against from the very beginning.
I think it's very important that sometimes you can think a very small thing is really important and is going to ruin the film, and it won't. And often an editor can think that even more than you do, and you can get a bit obsessed with it. But the only times that I've felt dissatisfied with a film at the end like that is when I've had to cut two films that I was happy with that were at 70 minutes going out on television, and then I had to cut them for a world version and did it far too fast and under pressure from somebody else saying, oh, just his catchphrase was, who cares? Take all that out. Who cares? Take that out. Who cares? And it was like really under pressure and at great speed. And I gave in to some of those things and wasn't at all happy. And the world versions sometimes can end up being seen more than the one that goes out on television, which is pretty embarrassing. It seems less important at the time, but in fact it's more important. So
okay,
don't lose
sight of the ball or whatever it's called.
Don't be hustled. Don't make mountains out of molehills. Try beat them to death with 1,001 alternatives. They lose their focus. Well, I'll tell the absolute story because I've had a couple really ugly things happen, and I would have thought that with my background and so forth that I'd be left alone, and I'm always stunned when it happens. And this was a broadcast film in the UK. It was about Mandela. It was a drama. Obviously, it had to be true. I'd written the script. The commission editor had assigned a deputy commission editor to the project. We met with this person on the first day. We won him over, discussed every major editorial decision we were taking. The exec was wonderful, demanding, very, very smart, but fantastic to work with. And we went through a cut of film which we thought was very, very beautiful, really, really worked. He loved it, the exec. The deputy commission editor loved it. Everybody loved it. It was fantastic. I was so pleased. And the commission editor came to see it on a day in which this person had 3 viewings. It was in the summer, and they were leaving at 4 o'clock that day to go on holiday. They were in great pressure. They came in. Clearly, this person hadn't been communicated to effectively by the deputy, and that was a new relationship that they were working that out. Took against the film in the first 10 minutes, stopped it, demanded all kinds of changes, and then left in a hurry without any discussion. And we did recut the opening, and thankfully I had control over the opening, so the opening changed quite a bit. It's all drama reconstruction, but at least I controlled. It wasn't really my idea, the opening, but it was my execution of the opening, so I felt okay with that. Thought that would do it, and then this exec saw it on holiday and demanded changes throughout the whole film, all of which were actually ultimately very, very difficult to achieve. It was based upon his writings, and the feature film, Cry Freedom or Long Walk to, I can't, which it is, it's Long Walk to Freedom. All the rights have been sold. The book, you couldn't have anything in the book, and there's a second book called Conversations with Myself, which was an anthology of his writings, and that had been sold, so you couldn't use any of those writings. And I ended up with 9 Mandela letters from prison. It was about his prison years, of which 3 were political and were not really of value. So I had 6 letters to structure the whole drama about. And we're going to bring an editor in to make the changes. The exec was going to say, Tom, I'll do what I can to minimize the damage to the film, but, we're going to damage the film. And I was going nuts. And my partner, who's a very, very talented filmmaker, calmed me down and said, what you have to do is you have to make them afraid. And I call it fear change sides. So you're afraid they're going to damage it. What you have to do is make them afraid. And that's what I did. So I called the commission editor up, and because I have a relationship with this person, they answered the phone, and I just said, I've been thinking about this, and this broadcaster is heading for a disaster. Disaster, what do you mean? I said, well, and I made this up a little bit, but I knew that there were 16 million copies of Long Walk to Freedom sold around the world, and just estimated 500,000 sold in the UK. I knew that there were over 1.5 million copies of Conversations with Myself sold around the world. That might be 100,000 in the UK. And I said, look, I've been on this for 3-4 months, maybe a bit longer, but there'll be people in the UK and tens of thousands of people who know more about this man's life than I do, and certainly than you do. And that there'll be a whole series of events in his life that we haven't touched on. It was a very elegiac kind of style approach. It was about the emotional landscape, not about the factual landscape, because I had so little to deal with. And I said, these people will look at this film, and if it's been pushed in the direction of appearing to be a longitudinal, linear discussion of the events in prison, we're going to leave so many important things out that people will be asking, why wasn't this in? Why wasn't that in? Why wasn't that in? And then I used my killer line. I said, I never lie to the press. I don't want to be in a position where they call me up and say, why isn't this in the film, that's in the film, and that in the film? I'll say, because the broadcaster wouldn't pay the rights for the thing. That would be a disaster for all of us. Don't put me in a position where I have to lie to a journalist, or I have to say something the truth, and it'll be a disaster. Oh, you better come in, you better come in. And of course, the exec had already been primed. This person came to the cutting room. I arrived deliberately late. The editor who was brought in had seen the film, turned to the exec and said, I don't want to touch this. This is such a good film. I can't change it. I can't make it better. So I let the editor and the commission editor and the exec have 15 minutes. I stood outside. They didn't know I arrived on time, but right till the end. I came in. We watched the first part. It was a 4-part film, 3 commercial breaks. And she turned to me and she said, "It's truly wonderful." And we watched the rest of the film, got up, she went to the, I was trying to keep the gender out of it, I've now given away, it's a she, but anyway, it goes to the doorway after the viewing and turned to me and shook her finger at me and said, "Don't you change a single frame," and walked out. Because we had made her afraid of the consequences of the cut. And now that's a pretty desperate strategy and could backfire.
Yes.
But at the end of
Well
the
done,
day,
well done.
at the end of the day, you know, that's all I had left, right? So you turn the fear around and make them afraid. You explain that your contributors are going to do X. You're going to say that that's not factually correct. You're going to explain that there's some other element of the story that you know, we've left untouched, but if you go down this route, we're going to have to expose it, and you don't want to do that. You know, hopefully you don't get there. But if you do, I mean, my view is I fight to the death on the film that I've made. And I think we have a question here before we go. So
yeah, it seems that from the panel above, it seems like you have to be part politician, and it seems like this level of debate, this level of discussion, this level of conversation, this level of, I guess, pitting executive producers against producers, editors against, you know. So how can you discuss that element of, I guess, the aspect of producing and directing at that level?
A tactician maybe more than a politician.
you're looking for collaboration. You want collaborators. You want to bring the producer in. You want to bring the exec in. For that matter, if you can, you bring the commissioner in. You want as big a creative team as you possibly can get. You share, you work together, you try to be direct and honest and so forth. That's the best, ultimately the best strategy. But you need good people in all those fields. You need I mean, Kirby put it very succinctly. There's some execs that are absolutely brilliant to work with, and can give you untold levels of advice and input and support if you get the right execs. So the conflict occurs when, usually when you're dealing with people that are not that good at their job, either as producer or an exec, or a commission editor. When you're working with really, really good people, it's a treat. I mean, I've worked with commission editors who I just love having them in the cutting room because they're so on the ball. They love the work you're doing. They're sometimes very critical, and their criticism is often very on the mark. And you want to hear it because you want to make the film better. So it doesn't have to be a battle. But at the same time, I think you have to prepare all the time for the potential that there's going to be a conflict down the road because something else is going to intervene. A head of, creative, what do they call them? Creative directors of a broadcaster, or a lawyer, or some other person might intervene at some point. And, so you have to be prepared for the worst, plan for the worst, and work for the best. That would be my view. Anyone else? We're just summing up now?
No, I think that it really is important to think down the road what might be coming up. And I think if you get into a position where it seems you're really at loggerheads, it's really important to talk to other people, even people who aren't in the film business, but just there's a lot of people who have to deal with these issues in other industries, how you deal with somebody above you or somebody who has that kind of control. Certainly go to other filmmakers who might have dealt with it. I mean, talk it through, because there might be an entire dynamic at play here that I mean, it's almost a little bit like therapy. I mean, I've found myself in situations where people are just asking, where somebody who's helping me kind of think this through, is asking me all these personal questions about what the relationship was, what the dynamic was, what their history was, and it can actually give you sort of an insight into what their motivation is. You may not, what you think they're concerned about, the reason you think they're trying to make this change may not be accurate. It may be completely off, and so you have to really think this through, and because it is a very important decision. I mean, if you get into a conflict, the whole project can blow up, and it can continue to blow up all the way through the rest of the project and through release. So you want to be very careful, and if you pull that weapon, you want to make sure you hit the target.
Okay, one last question, yeah.
Hi, what are the 3 things that you would never do as an executive producer or a commissioner to the people like yourselves, based on your experience thus far?
The 3 things. Mike, 3 things?
I don't know if I've got 3. I would if I was an executive producer, try and not get involved in a project where I didn't believe in the person who was making it, because, you know, why would you do it in the first place, you know? So that would be my one thing.
Let's all do one very quickly. And then, this is the last. We really have to go. I'm getting all kinds of signals.
It's a very, very good question. I'm going to pass for a moment. Go ahead.
I would say that even if I thought it, I would never say I had saved or rescued the film. I hear so many executive producers saying that as though that was their job description, really, to rescue films, and I find it very patronising. So even if they felt that's what they'd done, even if I felt that's what I'd done, I'd try not to say it to anyone.
I won't say I'd never do this, because there may be a situation where you do have to do it, but I would always strive never to undermine the team emotionally. I would always try to buttress them, even if I have a criticism of the work. It would be in the context of as warm and as supportive a critique you can make, because to be a director is the most exposed and most difficult position you can be in. It's only for brave people. To direct, you must be brave, or foolish, or maybe a combination of them. But it's the most difficult job. It's the least understood, and frankly, people who don't direct often don't have the courage. Not everyone, but often don't have the courage to become directors. And you have to honor that. You have to honor that courage, I think. Even if they're not doing it well, you have to honor their willingness to be out there.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's important because you as an executive, you need that director to continue to work and to continue to go beyond what they are legally obligated to do. So I would say, you know, you actually are damaging yourself if you create an antagonistic kind of relationship. So it's really just echoing what Tom is saying.
Thank you very much. We have to go. We've overrun a little bit. If you could fill out those forms, it really would be appreciated. Many, many thanks, and maybe we'll get some new members of Directors UK in the future.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.